Hi, I'm a higher ed CMO, and I have a confession to make. In the last 8 weeks, 7 employees in my department have resigned, and 5 of those have left for positions outside of higher ed. I think we have a significant crisis on our hands, and that is why I am so happy to be talking this week with Kevin McClure. Welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, the podcast designed for higher education marketers. I'm your host, Jaime Hunt, and I am so excited to have this opportunity to share insights and inspiration. With Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, I'm designing a different kind of podcasting experience. With each episode, I'll be bringing in a guest for a deep dive into the challenges and joys we all face in higher education marketing. After each episode, you can join the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag HigherEdCMO. I would love to see this become like a book club, but for a podcast. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at JamieHuntIMC, that's JamieHuntIMC, for more opportunities to connect. I'm really happy to have with me today Kevin McClure, who's an associate professor of higher education at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. How are you, Kevin?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
I'm well. As we're recording today, it is Juneteenth, and so I'm doing a rare midday recording for the show this week. I wanted to talk to Kevin because he has done a lot of really interesting writing and tweeting, I have to be honest, in the space of higher education leadership in the past couple of years in particular. And I've been following you for a while. Previous to being at Miami, I was in the UNC system at Winston-Salem State. So it's been fun to follow what you've had to say. Recently, you've written a lot about burnout and demoralization. And across social media and in talking with my colleagues across the country, this seems to be a growing issue. What do you attribute this to?
Well, first of all, let me just say that most people that I know in higher ed, I've met through Twitter. And so, it's not uncommon for me to feel like I have a number of friends out there whom we've never have actually met in person. And so that has been a space that I am very active in and where I do a lot of thinking out loud in some cases and trying to get a sense from other people what they're experiencing and to hear from how things are looking on their campuses and can be, I think, a really useful tool. But coming back around to your question, I think that in many cases, the issues that I have been writing about have certainly become more of an issue recently, but have been around for a long time. And in fact, I myself have experienced and have had coworkers and colleagues who have experienced burnout and demoralization well before we even had any sense that there would be a pandemic like the one we've experienced in the last couple of years. And so I think there are a couple of reasons why this is really on folks' radar now. One is the pandemic, certainly. I mean, there is no denying the fact that we are still living through, I think, an incredibly stressful, difficult, traumatic time. And so that means that some of the stressors that we experience at work have been dialed up. There are some people that have been in roles in higher education, for example, where they have been part of a crisis response for what feels like multiple years in a row. And so that is a perfect scenario for burnout to arise, that type of chronic workplace stress. On top of that, of course, we've got some compounding factors like crises in childcare. We've got certainly the continuation of violence from white supremacy that makes it all the more difficult when you show up at the workplace to feel like you can be your full self to be your authentic self. And again, these introduce stressors on the job. All of these things that I'm talking about, as I said, kind of predate the pandemic, but I think we've certainly seen them become intensified or worse in the last couple of years. I think there's also a certain element of this where we have an elevated consciousness of it. Some of us have increased our own learning around these concepts and where they come from and how to spot them in ourselves and other people. We are certainly viewing the workplace through a different lens. And some of that is because people who have been studying these things for a very long time have been able to use their expertise and bring their voice forward and to help some of us that are newer to it, like me, have a vocabulary to make sense of what it is that we're experiencing. And so the way that I would kind of explain this is it's kind of a both and scenario where we've got problems that have existed for a long time in higher education. And we also have, I think, some new pressures. The combination of them together just basically means that there's a lot of stress in the workplace. And so these are some of the responses that we're seeing to that.
I started this episode with my confession, which was that I've lost 7 employees in the past 8 weeks, and 5 of them have left higher education altogether. And I don't know that I feel like this is going to keep going. I see there's a couple of other people on my team that I think are what I would call flight risks. And I'm wondering what advice you can give to people to combat this and to combat the challenges of burnout and demoralization and all of that.
Well, so if you don't mind, I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of those circumstances. So I know you probably don't want to go into too much detail, but I'd be curious to hear about what's been going on for people that are in your space and in your role that have you think maybe contributed to or led to that type of turnover.
Yeah, so every single person that left um, has left for a fully remote position. Those who have left higher ed altogether have gotten significant salary increases that we would just not be able to compete with. One person who left, honestly, she got her dream situation. She was thinking she was going to have to start up a company on her own time after work hours, and somebody's essentially paying her to start her own company, which is impossible to compete with. Like, you go do that. That's your dream. I'm very happy for you. And I'm happy for everybody because I think they at least believe they're going to be happier in their new roles. But I'm a little worried about people thinking that the grass is going to be greener on the other side and going into organizations that have similar or the same problems and challenges that we have in higher ed.
I think it's really interesting because even in your answer there, I think there are some important insights and things, of course, that you as a leader yourself have just kind of an innate understanding of some of these issues because you are on the front lines in the sense that you are working with your own staff and thinking through some of these challenges. But yeah, I mean, we've got a problem with undercompensation in higher education. And so it makes it difficult to compete when other people get offers. And the truth of the matter is, especially at the staff level, that many institutions have not been particularly prepared for or concerned about being outcompeted on salary. I think they've been more than willing to part ways with people and just replace them. And so there's a certain level of complacency on the part of institutions, I think, on that front. Yeah, we've got the issue of remote work and the fact that there are many institutions, I think, that are very much glued to tradition and operating according to a set of assumptions around where work has to happen in order for the institution to be successful. And so, yeah, when it comes to kind of advice for folks that are in leadership positions, my first one is that I think there are a set of answers that are already right there in front of us. We may not be very comfortable with them all the time. We may not always feel like we individually are in a position where we can act on them. But nevertheless, my sense when I talk to folks that are in leadership positions is they have a pretty good sense of what the problems are. and even a pretty good sense of what the solutions are. And so I think one of the bigger challenges that we have in higher education right now, where folks really need help, is to figure out, how do I take that first step, or what is the first step that I could take as someone in a leadership role that could be helpful. Having these conversations is a great starting point. Recognizing them, being realistic about the nature of problems is, I think, really powerful and can be powerful for people that you're leading. We went through a period of time through the pandemic where there was a certain type of collective unwillingness to talk honestly about the nature of the problems in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
And many people in higher education felt as if they were constantly on the receiving end of spin. And that we were approaching very real, life-threatening problems with a type of kind of toxic positivity that made it feel like it was impossible to have kind of an honest conversation about what we ought to do moving forward. And so now, more than ever, I think it's critically important for people that are in leadership roles to do a much better job about saying, okay, this is the problem that's in front of us. I recognize it. Maybe I don't even have a great handle on it yet, but here's what I'm going to do to try to better understand maybe why people are leaving, or ways in which we could, through a data-driven process, understand our own workplace so that we can devise some solutions that are really tailored to us. I think that could be a great first step. Another, I think, really important step that leaders could be taking is, let me figure out what is within kind of my area of influence that I could try to make a real difference in. Maybe that is being an advocate for my staff and letting them know the ways in which I'm being an advocate. Here's the way that I am kind of pressing up. And being present and active in these conversations that I know that you all aren't always privy to. And I want you to know that here's kind of how I'm approaching this. And I can't make you promises that we're going to see change tomorrow, but we're working at it. And I think that we're going to be able to make progress over time. I'm not saying that those two things by themselves are going to fix everything or going to keep your staff from taking another job. But I tend to think that these are better than doing nothing and just saying, we're going to get completely roasted here and the private sector is going to come in and swoop in all my employees. That doesn't seem like a particularly viable solution either.
No. One of the things that I think I failed to do was tell my team all the ways that I was advocating for them. I was one of the primary advocates for a hybrid work policy and a remote work policy for our institution. And I'm not sure my staff fully understood that I didn't really have a lot of allies in it. It was me and two other people just fighting for it. And I'm proud of where we ended up and the flexibility that we have. Another thing I think I didn't do up front was talk to them about, if you're considering leaving, like, let's talk through why, let's talk through, are there things in your current job that you're just tired of doing, you're burned out on doing? And I've found in previous institutions that we could have two people who were unhappy with different parts of their job and just like switch the tasks and everybody's happy because it's a new challenge for them. Things like that. I think just talking to you right now, I'm realizing I needed to do a lot more of that up front. And I've just started doing that recently, of like, let's talk about why you're unhappy enough to be considering leaving. Hey all, I hope you're enjoying this episode of Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO. I want to take just a quick moment to thank my friends at Nectar who made this new Enrollify podcast possible. Nectar brings affordable communications infrastructure to college campuses. It's like Slack, but for the higher ed student experience. Nectar integrates seamlessly with all major LMSs, making it easy for instructors and administrators to build emergent learning communities in all of their classes and groups without the extra work. Their focus is on boosting student engagement and reducing instructor stress by building a learning community in every classroom. By leveraging familiar technology like instant messaging channels, Nectar prepares students for the remote yet collaborative work environment of the future. You can learn more about their platform by heading on over to Nectar. That's nectir.io, and be sure to tell the team that Jaime sent you their way.
Broadly speaking, in higher ed, we don't have a practice of doing exit interviews very often with people. And so, even if those are not conversations that lead to somebody deciding to stay, they can be conversations that help us shape our practice moving forward. And so I think there can still be some value to that. As I'm thinking about the CMO role, kind of in particular, and folks that are in leadership roles in that area, one thing that I have thought about, and you could push back on this, by the way, and tell me that I'm wrong or misunderstanding something, but um, higher education has a tendency to be incredibly future focused. We are always thinking about how do we recruit the next class? What's the next story that we're going to tell? What's that next institutional win or accomplishment that we want to highlight? Um, and don't get me wrong, those are incredibly important things that we have to be doing. What it means, though, is that we have a tendency to forget to look backwards or to do
Mm.
any kind of collective reflection. And there's a real risk here that we are going to move forward not really having spent any time reflecting on what the last couple of years have been like for us as a community. And so I don't know if kind of the CMO has a role to play in that, or if really the role is about kind of how do we highlight that next thing, and how do we, help to think more about institutional wins versus kind of getting lost in losses. But nevertheless, I think part of the healing process for many campuses is going to be to kind of stop and step back and say, wow, like this, think about what it is that we just experienced. How do we take stock of that and learn from it, and maybe even find some things to celebrate within that so that we can better move forward. Um, the other thing that I have thought about as I've been driving around through the last couple of years is looking at billboards, and um, it struck me that we have a tendency to kind of again talk a lot about organizational victories and organizational accomplishments. And so you got these big billboards about here's how we did on the most recent ranking. We grew again in our enrollment. We did all these things. And at the same time, I knew that the employees at that institution were not doing well.
Mm.
How do I reconcile the fact that we've got this external narrative around institutional growth and excellence, and we're constantly moving forward onto the next big thing, and yet I know the folks that are working there are barely holding on.
Mm.
It's a really interesting tension there where again, there can sometimes be a narrative about the institution that doesn't match the experience of people who are working there. And so I kind of wonder, how do we maybe not necessarily reconcile that, because maybe that's not the purpose of marketing, but as storytellers, right? Maybe there is a role to play in making sure that we are also telling a story to our internal constituents that's authentic to their experience of the last couple of years. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or if I'm drifting too far away from. I'd be curious to hear what your reflections are on that.
Yeah, that you hit me right here because that is, I had never thought about that before. And that, as an extension of that, I think that the people in the marketing office that are doing that work of telling the institutional story are probably among the closest to that disconnect. Like, you're telling a story that's positive while you are worn down and exhausted and tired and demoralized. And so I imagine that for my team that's charged with telling that story, that disconnect is even stronger feeling than maybe just the average university employee. And I think there's a place for CMOs and higher ed marketing leaders in this conversation to talk at our executive cabinets and all of that about not forgetting what just happened to all of us, and that we have a very real challenge. And it's not just it, I don't want to say that communication can solve this challenge, because I often say communication can't solve a bad management problem, but communication can help support a change, or communication can help support an effort to try to understand how employees are feeling right now. So that just I mean, that just hit me right here in the chest. Like that's a thing we need to be thinking about. Talking about that billboard that you're driving by and thinking about the disconnect between the experience that we're promising and the experience that people are having. That's a big brand issue too. Our brands should be authentic. Our brands should be the experience that you're going to have on the campus. And if you're projecting that you're going to be working with faculty and staff who are just high energy and enthusiastic right now, that's probably not the experience you're having right now as a student.
And, like I said, it's a tricky thing, like we do obviously want to be attracting applicants and want people to come work here, that sort of thing. But, it's as a university employee, it's a striking thing if you feel like I'm stepping off the plane and I see all this marketing for my institution and it's like everything is great here. You should come apply. And meanwhile, you're like, well, I don't know. People are getting sick over here.
Right.
And that and obviously there's always a bit of a disconnect in terms of like your marketing isn't going to want to reflect that there are institutional problems from time to time, and that is just a fact of life. But as a counter, I guess I also saw an institution in my own city, a community college, that did a whole campaign where they on billboards were celebrating their faculty mentors of the year. And each billboard was kind of telling the story of a faculty member who was selected by students for the role that they played in kind of shaping their journey at the institution. And that stood out to me because it was such first of all, an outstanding way to market the institution itself and the type of academic experience that you're going to have there, but also a way of celebrating the people at the institution and not kind of these big organizational successes, which have a way of, I think, pulling the work away from the actual people themselves and turning it into just kind of an institutional thing. Um, and so that was kind of a counter to the everything is we are moving forward with everything. Here's where we're at with our rankings. We are growing. Instead, it was a very people focused way of celebrating faculty and staff at the institution, and has the double advantage of making the institution look pretty good in the process.
That's it. I'm glad you said that. I mean, I'm glad you said that was your reaction to that, because this spring we did a State of the University address with the president. And one of the things that I really, really was glad that he was welcome to doing was, instead of talking about those sort of abstract numbers, he pulled out and did highlights on specific faculty that had done specific great things, specific students that had done great things. And it was more of a storytelling about the people. And really, we're a community, right? We should be. A university should be a community. And so the stories should be about the people, because without the people, there's literally nothing that would be provided by an institution. There's no service that we provide that doesn't require very, very hands-on faculty or staff engaged with it. So as a faculty member, so we're in a little bit different space. As you know, I'm an administrator. You're a faculty member at different institutions. But as a faculty member, are there things that institutions do that make you kind of just roll your eyes, like, oh, not this again? That they do with that marketing talk, that we should be kind of knowing about how faculty might be thinking about it.
Ooh, that's a great question. I'm sure that there are instances where that kind of pops up. I have to be honest, and again, this is something that I'd be curious to get your thoughts on as well. And some other folks were very critical of the way that the back to campus plans got kind of branded
Mm-hmm.
and marketized. And on the one hand, I saw kind of a public health rationale for that approach, because you wanted to make it clear and tailored to your population, and wanted people to still be excited about coming to the institution. But on the other hand, as I said, it did also have this feel of being like it was not based in science or based in public health, but was rather kind of grounded in, yeah, marketing, or that you were kind of, it was maybe spin to help the institution look good and like it had everything under control when maybe that wasn't always the case all the time. So that was definitely an instance where I saw some tension there where folks were saying it feels like this plan is trying to convey a type of confidence and positivity in the types of experiences that students were going to have that I'm not sure that we're really going to be able to deliver, or I'm not sure are really based in anything from a kind of public health perspective.
Yeah. So when I started the pandemic, I was at Winston-Salem State in North Carolina. And one of the last straws for me was the way that the system dictated that all the schools were basically going to handle their response to COVID the same. And it felt divorced from the reality of the different student populations that we served. At an HBCU, we had a lot more students who were Pell recipients, and we really needed to be thinking about that we can't send them home. They might not have a home that they can go to safely, or they might not be able to afford to go home, or numerous other things versus some of the other schools in the system. And coming to Miami and hearing how Miami was handling it was like a breath of fresh air, that we had public health people kind of crafting the message for us. Like, this is the way to communicate in a way that moves people to action versus, some bureaucrat in the system office saying, this is what we're going to do or say. And that was great. Although from a marketing and communications perspective, it was a real challenge to figure out how to motivate people to do the things that kept the community safe, when those things aren't that fun. Mask wearing and social distancing, and that's just not part of the college experience for students. And I think we're going to see that have ramifications for years, that the students who started during the pandemic and had the first 2 years of their college experience be very socially distanced and mask wearing all the time and being kind of stuck in their rooms. We're finding that they're not joining clubs as much. We're finding that they're not as engaged in their classes. And this veered way off topic from the question that you asked, but I just think do you think something like that would be impacting the employees too? This like 2 years of being sort of in isolation from each other, impacting our ability to be a community again.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it that is part of the challenge, and is certainly makes your jobs that much more complicated, because I think part of what it is that you all do is to help to bring cohesiveness to the community and to inspire kind of affinity to the institution, inclusive of faculty and staff, not just students, but make us all feel part of something bigger than ourselves. And there's been very good reason over the last couple of years for folks to keep their distance and to spend more time in isolation. And we haven't had that ability to share space with one another. So there's a rebuilding process that has to happen, I think, over the next couple of years. It's not going to be a thing that happens automatically. Um, I think many folks almost need to be reintroduced to the institution.
Mm.
Um, I'm an employee of my university. There's no doubt about that. I understand where my paycheck is coming from, and I know who our mascot is and where my office is located. But the fabric that connected each of us to one another as colleagues, and I think helped us to understand our place within this wider community, have become that those connections have become a little frayed, I think. And so I could see a real role of kind of CMOs and the folks that they supervise to potentially help in that rebuilding process and reintroduce people to the community that they're in. That's true not just for incoming students that are going to be new to campus and just kind of learning their place. I think it's going to be true for faculty and staff who maybe have been there for a long period of time and have new questions about where do I fit here, and Is this a place that I still want to commit to day in and day out and really give my all to, or at least give, my professional hours to in a way that's engaged and meaningful. So I don't know exactly what that looks like. I don't know exactly what it looks like to reintroduce folks to the place where they're working and to help rebuild some of those ties. But for what it's worth, for folks that are in your that are like you and in your role, I think I wouldn't make the assumption that faculty and staff have that same affinity to the institution that they once did. And there can be a lot of value to trying to, as best we can, rebuild some of those connections.
Hey, all, Zach here from Enrollify. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. Our shows feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Mickey Baines, Jeremy Tears, Jamie Hunt, Corinne Myers, Jamie Gleason, and many, many more. You can learn more about the Enrollify Podcast Network at podcasts.enrollify.org. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea. Find yours at podcasts.enrollify.org.
Yeah, I think that's something that it's just going to be essential. And I'm a little concerned. We've both written a lot about remote work and the future of work. And right now I have about 10%-ish of my team is fully remote. And the other 90% are working in the office, an average about 2 days a week. And we just switched so that it's the same 2 days a week, so that we're seeing each other in community for 2 days together. But what do you think universities need to do to be ready for the quote unquote future of work? And what do you think the future of work is?
Well, I mean, similar to what I had started our conversation by saying, I think universities in rather, and not just universities, or instead of universities, what I'll say is, folks that are in leadership roles, we need to be having honest conversations about these things. My sense is that folks are making kind of a set of assumptions about remote work. One is that remote work is bad for the student experience. Two, that remote work compromises the quality of services or work product being delivered. Three, that remote work is anathema to the residential college experience and will spell the demise of institutions that are very much built around the residential college experience. Four, that remote work means that you're going to have empty offices all the time. So basically, I think we need to unpack some of the assumptions that have been kind of caked on to this notion of remote work. One of them, by the way, being that what we've done for the last couple of years is what good remote work looks like. What we did, and this is coming from Ann Helen Peterson and Charlie Warzel's book Out of Office, which is very good, by the way, which is that what we've experienced the last couple of years was not intentionally designed remote work. It was kind of emergency remote work in the middle of a pandemic while many of us were at home with children and all sorts of other things bearing down on us. And so if we're using that as our basis for thinking about the future of work, that's not the future of work. That was remote work in an emergency context. I tend to think that there's a huge place for workplace flexibility. So it's not the case that I think a lot of higher ed workers are necessarily clamoring for 100% remote work all the time. I think there are a lot of people who are really interested in having some additional flexibility. And so that could mean working from home a couple of days a week, having a little bit more of a flexible schedule that fits their family or fits their personal lives, fits their own health better for them. And if we're able to accommodate some of those things and introduce some of that flexibility, it can be, I think, good for the services we deliver to students, many of whom are still looking for virtual options. It could be good for the number, the amounts, the quality of services that we deliver, it can be good for our employees and give them reason to stay. Um, so that's the future of work that I envision, is one that I think has a lot more flexibility. Certainly, I think there could be a space for some additional roles that are remote. Um, but if there are folks that are uncomfortable moving too far in that direction, I think flexibility could be a type of middle of the road approach that is a positive step forward in a lot of ways and will help give employees reason to, stay in their roles.
I feel like remote work also has a lot of advantages, particularly for people who have disabilities or chronic healthcare conditions. I have a friend who has IBS, and they don't have to miss a beat when they work from home because they're just right down the hall from the bathroom, and they're not like worried about having to run out of a meeting. They're just there. People who have chronic pain conditions or things where maybe it's more comfortable to sit on the couch to work or sit in a recliner or something. But also, I think it opens up that whole balance of work and life that I think women in particular, mothers in particular, struggle with, of taking care of their kids, picking their kids up after school, having there be opportunities for that to not be this sort of anxiety-inducing rush to the door at the end of the day so that you don't have to pay the $45 fee because your kid's been sitting there too long or things like that. I think it makes it a more equitable workplace generally.
Yeah, 100%. So I think thinking about, institutions have paid lip service to diversity, equity, inclusion. They often have a way of thinking about it purely in terms of kind of the composition of folks that are working or studying at the institution, which is certainly an important aspect of it. But making some real changes to workplace culture, I think, is a critically important part of creating a more equitable place, a more equitable institution. The other thing that I'll note is that for some leaders who are maybe a little uncertain about this, get ready for your mind to be blown. But like all of the faculty members at your institution enjoy workplace flexibility that is not offered to anybody else. We
Mm-hmm.
have for decades and decades and decades been operating with incredible flexibility, and it may not be possible in every part of campus within every unit to replicate that exactly. But if you're saying this is impossible, I just can't wrap my head around it, I have a ton of autonomy and flexibility in my work, and so do my colleagues that are faculty members, and we still manage to be very responsible, productive, and doing what we need to be doing as part of our jobs. And so um, I'd love to see the type of flexibility that I enjoy applied more broadly to folks in staff roles, because we're all important. We're all important to the mission of the institution. That my colleagues that are staff members are doing things that I'm not able to do, and so without them, the institution falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as a parent of young children, I get to go pick up my kids in the middle of the day if they need me to pick them up. If I need to be home with them, I'm able to be home with them, and I'm still able to do my job. And it seems to me that there's no logical reason why we can't provide that same type of flexibility to staff members.
Oh, I love hearing that. One of the things that I loved about the first president I worked for is he said that our housekeeping staff was the most important people on campus because anybody else could be out for a week and you wouldn't necessarily notice. But if the housekeeping staff is all gone for a week, you're definitely going to notice that. And they probably have the least amount of flexibility of anybody on campus, which is unfortunate. So what do you think that leaders can do to build this more flexible work culture?
Yeah, so in terms of some concrete steps, I think, in the direction of how to build. There are a couple of ways to think about this. One is kind of the concrete, flexible workplace accommodations kind of conversation, and then there's, I think, a bigger conversation around workplace culture, broadly speaking. Um, Both of them start, I think, by asking a good set of questions and then trying to systematically answer those questions and collect data. So I know that's a very nerdy first response, but I think the reality is that we don't have a great understanding in higher education, even within our own institutions, of who our employees are, what it is that they're looking for, what type of growth they're expecting, ways in which they're satisfied or dissatisfied, why they're leaving, some basic questions about our employees. I'm not convinced we have great answers to those questions. And so as we're thinking about precisely what types of workplace changes need to be made, a critical first step is understanding who are our employees, what is their experience in the job, and what is it that they are expecting of the workplace. I think that could be important because then you can say, okay, out of our employees, this percentage of people, the most important thing to them is having some additional time at home. Okay, then we can work with that, or we can think through, okay, what are some options that are going to work? I think additionally, if it's the case that people say the number one problem that we are having right now is in the space of benefits and compensation, then again, as an institution, you can say, all right, if we do not want to be in a space of perpetual searches and abnormal turnover and struggling to meet our goals, then we are going to need to start setting aside money to make a real difference in compensation. And for folks that say this is crazy, do you have any understanding of the finances of our institute? My short answer is yes, I have an understanding, because before I started talking about workplace stuff, I mainly studied institutional finances. But I just talked to an institution whose leadership I had come and spoken with, and they identified compensation as the most important issue that they wanted to address. They were able to identify resources, and they are moving forward this year with raises. They are addressing salary compression issues at their institution. This is a public regional institution in an area that is not swimming in resources. So these are things that are possible. They can be done. And it could just be, we're going to identify this as the big issue that we're going to tackle for right now. And then we'll move forward with some other things that we've identified after that. In terms of kind of some of the broader workplace culture conversations, again, one thing is we need to have a conversation about whether we have the right folks in leadership roles to be leaning into some of these conversations. As I've been introducing some of these ideas, advancing some of these conversations, I have gotten pushback from some folks that are in leadership roles who are questioning, are things really this bad? Things seemed pretty good prior to the pandemic. And so that seems, and from my vantage point, it seems then that maybe the pandemic is to blame for a lot of these issues. And the truth is that for any of us that have had success in higher education and have, landed in leadership positions, it means that in some ways the system has worked for us. We've been able to navigate that system. And so we may not immediately see something that needs to change. Some of the problems that other people are experiencing, we may not have a great perspective on. We may not have a great handle on. And so we need folks that are going to be willing to kind of listen and set aside what they themselves have experienced and think a little bit more critically about the experiences of other people, and either be willing to take those experiences seriously or say, I'm not the right person to be leading the next phase of this institution, and I think that there's somebody else that's in a better position to do so. I am not advocating for like mass resignations here or anything like that, but the reality is that, from my vantage point, from my perspective, we need leaders who are prepared and understand that we have had workplace problems in higher education for a long time. And right now is the time that people are expecting change to happen. We cannot sit on it. We cannot wait for it because employees are not waiting. And if you look at them in the face and they've got an offer on the table and you say, can you just wait? They better have some hope that waiting will go somewhere. And if the track record of the institution is not really one that has prioritized employees or really thought critically and seriously about workplace culture, I'm just not sure that they've got a lot that they can be holding their breath for.
I was talking to a leader from another institution who said something like, well, the pendulum is going to swing back and the employees won't have any more options outside of higher ed, so we won't be as much at risk of losing them. And to me, that was just so mind-blowingly tone deaf. Like, we only have to treat people well because we don't want them to leave. Like, that shouldn't be the only reason that we are treating employees well. Like, if the pendulum does swing and unemployment goes way up and we have 200 applicants for every job again, that doesn't mean that we treat the people who work for us like they're cogs in a machine. Like, that's immoral. And I really challenged my listeners to make sure that you're not falling into that mindset of thinking, and to be an advocate for your employees, advocate for them to get raises that they deserve. And nobody should sit in the same job for 8 years doing an amazing job at it and not get some sort of raise and I'm not going to say or, because you shouldn't give somebody a title promotion without a raise, but they should get some sort of recognition of they have 8 more years of expertise that they should be recognized for having. But this sort of mindset of leadership against employees, it should be leadership backing employees and leadership advocating for employees, particularly in higher education, where what we're quote unquote selling is the labor of our employees.
Yeah, 100%. I could not agree with you more, Jamie, that if our only rationale and justification and motivation for doing this is if we don't, we're going to lose people. And then the moment that we maybe don't have that problem, we stop paying attention to it. That misses the mark in a lot of ways. I say we fundamentally have a moral, ethical responsibility to care for not just our students, but to care for the well-being of our employees as well. And this is a community expectation, I think. Mm-hmm. I say, for example, that we also need to be caring about the well-being of people that are in leadership roles, because they are human. We are people. All of us have signed on to work for organizations that are dedicated to human development. Mm-hmm. And if that means that we are not paying attention to the development of the people that are studying and working at our institution, then we have really lost our way, I think. And so as a basic question, if you are someone who's a provost, for example, who's all about learning and all about, all about human growth and potential, and I ask you, what opportunities do you have at your own institution for employees to be learning and growing and developing, and there isn't much of an answer, then that suggests that we are talking a big game, but not really following through when it comes to our own employees. So yeah, this isn't just about we've got a turnover problem or we're losing people, and so we've got to make sure that we're putting some changes in place so that we don't lose people. That certainly is part of the equation, but it's bigger than that, I think. And part of the responsibility of leadership is to lead in a way that clearly shows that your actions are in alignment with your values. And I think caring for our employees should be a key value that shows up in our actions.
Couldn't agree more. I want to pivot just a little bit. You recently tweeted that you don't think that those leaving higher ed will be gone forever. They may go and come back. Tell me a little bit about that and why that might be a good thing.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's the case that we've got some folks that have become disillusioned with higher education, or it's simply the fact that there's new opportunities that have become available in the labor market. They've been recruited or they've been encouraged to apply for something, and they said, you know what, I'm going to give this a try. And they may have only worked in higher ed and not have worked in another context. And so it's not outside the realm of possibility that they go and try this other thing. And eventually they say, you know what, this was a good experience. I'm glad I did it, but I miss being in higher education or more directly, or I miss working with students in the way that I did before. And so they will come back around. And so not everybody also is going to start working for example, for a private sector corporation and find that the grass is greener. As you noted,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you could have a toxic organization in that's nonprofit and one that's for profit and everything in between. And so they may find that they changed, but it wasn't what they hoped for, and be looking for something different. And so and the reason why I don't think that that's a bad thing necessarily, that they may leave and come back, is they may come back to our institutions with new ideas, different ways of thinking. They may step that they themselves, after gaining some new experience, may step into leadership roles and say, "Listen, I have seen how it's possible to do this in a completely different way, and so I don't see any reason why we can't try this different way of doing it in the higher ed context." And so I think there can be, we as institutions can benefit from that new experience. So I don't have any idea of kind of how widespread that would be, but my sense in talking with some folks that I know that have left, for example, is they say, I want to give this a shot and see how it goes, but I don't know that it means that I'm going to be out of higher ed forever. It could just be that I need a break, and
Mm-hmm.
I want to try something different. I know some folks that have been working in the residence halls and are like, I can't do that anymore. I need a break. And so this new opportunity presented itself, so I'm going to try that. But it doesn't mean necessarily that they, are completely done with higher ed just yet.
Yeah, as we were talking, I was thinking that I would love to do like a sabbatical in a private company or a publicly traded company or something, just to get some of that experience under my belt. I've been in higher ed for 18 years, and before that I was a journalist, so it's been it's been basically non-existent, that corporate experience. And are there lessons that we can take from them to higher ed? I think most of our presidents have been like me, where they've just gone through higher ed and have not worked in industry, and provosts and student affairs leaders were probably RAs and RDs at some point, and maybe there's lessons that we can bring back to our campuses that would be beneficial. So before we wrap up, because I think I promised I'd only keep you for an hour, but you tweeted, I think this morning, about the demographic cliff being a manufactured crisis. And I read your thread and I was like, I kind of love this. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? And I'm hopefully encouraging people to follow you, because your tweets always make me think.
So I have, yes, all right. So I have so many, thoughts about this that are floating in my brain all the time. All right. So here's basically where I land with this. Some of this, by the way, is informed by kind of my understanding of the history, the long history of higher education and organizational change and development. But my sense in this conversation about I think that there is real population change happening in the United States. And some of that includes in parts of the country where there are fewer high school aged people that would even be interested in pursuing higher education. So I don't deny at all the realness, the existence of that type of population change. Um, where I think we sometimes get a little bit lost is that we have had certainly a set of policy decisions within the United States that I believe have intensified competition between institutions, the vast majority of which were never on equal footing to begin with, and policy choices that have basically turned the enrollment of students into the most important lifeline for our institutions, such that students themselves are viewed primarily through kind of dollars and cents.
Mm-hmm.
And when you've got a set of institutions that have, for most of their recent history, really revolved around enrolling one particular slice of that population, as they are competing intensely against one another for that slice of the population, and as every single person they enroll has a financial implication connected to it, I can understand how that feels acutely like a crisis. But from what I see is a series of decisions that have been made to prioritize a population, to underfund institutions, to encourage competition over collaboration. That's the manufactured element that I see at play. And I see similarly a different set of choices that we could make as a society, one that encourages more collaboration over competition, one that does a better job of providing funding to institutions, and one where we as a group of we as institutions and people who work at institutions say there are a lot of people that are still not making it to our institutions, either because we are saying no to them or because we say we're not built to educate this group, or we say we don't think they're ready, or we say, we don't think that they have the requisite experiences in order to be here. Those choices, we need to, I think, really, really think critically about those choices that we have made. The result of which I think make us feel that we're in a crisis when instead I think there are some alternatives that we could explore. Part of the other reason why I hate the demographic cliff conversation as well is that it has a tendency, I think, to once again kind of clearly establish a class of winners and losers. You've got a group of winners that are typically already well-sourced institutions that are going to be, I think, hoarding students over time. And then a group of institutions that some of which were explicitly geographically set up to serve more remote rural areas, that are going to be criticized and scrutinized and questioned and put on the chopping block because they are not able to compete with institutions when it comes to bringing in enrollment, that these other institutions that always had more resources from the very beginning were always located in metropolitan areas to begin with. Maybe so. Anyway, there's some real equity problems in the way that we are approaching this, and we're almost entirely placing the onus of responsibility on the shoulder of institutions and not thinking a little bit more systemically about policy. So anyway, scattered thoughts there, but the bottom line is that I tend to think more about we are in the midst of population change. There are places, for example, that are experiencing positive population change. All of those present management problems for institutions. And so we should be thinking about it in those terms and not in terms of how do we survive the catastrophe of, there not being as many 18-year-olds when we've got an entire country that needs education and an ecosystem of world-class knowledge-producing institutions that would be silly to let suffer and to lose those institutions over something like this.
I'm obsessed with the 40-ish% of students who start college but don't graduate, and finding ways to help them complete their college education if that's something that they want. Because I think there's something really, really sad about having student loans but not having achieved the credential at the end of that time. And that I think that that's a good population that we tend to forget about, because it's a totally different approach to attract them, and it's a totally different offering. My husband was one of those who had 1 year of college left and had to start over at a new school, and it was structured specifically for non-traditional students doing a degree completion. So it was nights, weekends, online. Maybe a lesson from the pandemic is that for those schools that would have never done online, maybe there's opportunity now to do more bachelor's online programs for those degree completers. The people who just didn't finish for whatever reason. For my husband, it was financial. For others, it's an unexpected pregnancy or an ill family member. But whatever it is, I feel like higher ed has a little bit of a moral obligation to help those people finish what they paid a lot of money to start.
Yeah, 100%. I could not agree. That's, just one other kind of population that we could be putting more effort into trying to educate, as opposed to trying to think trying to grasp more and more at this kind of population of students. I also approach this, the other hat that I wear is as part of a research organization, the Alliance for Research on Regional Colleges. And we've done some work recently on rural serving institutions. And so I kind of I think about this spatially in the way that inequity kind of plays out spatially and geographically in the United States as well, in the sense that, we again have institutions that are serving populations that have been subject to systematic neglect for years, where they have been abandoned by corporations, and the institutions that are located there are critically important anchor institutions that are addressing gaps in public services as a result of that type of neglect. And on top of that, and then out of nowhere, we're saying, oh, there's this demographic cliff and these institutions aren't doing a good enough job enrolling students. And it's like, there's a whole bigger picture here than that, right? These are places that we have let go of, that we have not served people who lived there adequately. And so it would be, I think, again, a real mistake because we place such a emphasis on enrollment, to continue to underinvest in those institutions, because it would just be, again, to the detriment of the people that are living in those places. So some of what gets my blood boiling a little bit is the way that we don't do a good enough job kind of attending to that bigger picture as we're talking about the demographic cliff, because there's more at play here than that.
I could talk to you all day. I mean, I have seen so many of your tweets and thought, I want to talk to him about that, and I want to talk to him about that. But I'm hoping maybe you'll come back on the show another time and we can pick a totally different topic from one of your writing or one of your tweets to talk about. But in the meantime, how can people find you online if they're interested in hearing some of your wisdom?
Well, I would love to come back anytime. And yes, I'm primarily on Twitter, although the wisdom that you will find there, of course, is up for debate, but it's at Kevin R. McClure is my handle. I'm also on LinkedIn, but I'm still figuring that space out a little bit, to be honest. And you can find me on the website for the Alliance for Research on Regional Colleges, or through my faculty website at UNCW.
I really encourage our listeners to go give Kevin a follow, because he puts things out there that in 180 characters or whatever make you think a little bit. And he often has threads that kind of deeper dive into topics. And I think my listeners would enjoy that. If you want to find me online, you can find me on Twitter at Jaime Hunt IMC. That's JaimeHunt IMC. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt, or I am at Miami University. So if you want to look me up there and reach me by email, you can do that. And if you would like, I would really encourage you to give other episodes of the show a listen and throw a review up if you are so inclined, and to join in the conversation. And you can join in that conversation on Twitter using the hashtag HigherEdCMO. And I will be happy to chat with you more about anything you want to deeper dive into. Kevin, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a real pleasure, and I'm looking forward to seeing more from you on Twitter.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Hey y'all, Zach here from Enrollify. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO with Jaime Hunt. If you like this episode, do us a huge favor and hit that follow and subscribe button below. Furthermore, if you've got just 2 minutes to spare, we would greatly appreciate you leaving a rating and a review of this show on Apple Podcasts. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. But Enrollify is far more than just a podcast network. Enrollify is where higher ed comes to learn new marketing skills, discover new products and services, and find their next job. We're a growing learning community of 4,000 members, and we'd love to welcome you into the fold. You can access our free blog articles, newsletters, e-courses, and more, or purchase our master course on how to market a university with Terry Flannery at enrollify.org. We look forward to meeting you soon and welcoming you into the community. Again, you can subscribe for free at enrollify.org.